So Aviv Zohar is a senior lecturer at the School of Computer Science and Engineering here at the Hebrew University. As indicated in my opening remarks, the Cyber Law program, is linked up with the Cyber Security Research Center at the Computer Science Studies, and Aviv has been a collaborator. Aviv specializes in cryptocurrencies and more generally in the economics of computing. He's the chief scientist of Keynote on top of his affiliation, and he was in 2013. He appeared on the list of the 10 promising artificial intelligence scientists, young scientists of IEEE, Intelligent Systems, and also in the DeMarker most promising 40 young scientists. And now we have to see whether the promise real. So the talk is on the Crypto Anarchist Manifesto. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is, hi, oh wow, I'm very loud, I see. So I realize I'm the last thing standing between everybody and lunch, which is which is a hard place to be. I'm not going to talk a lot about my research, which is more on cryptocurrencies, as Yuval said. I am going to try and go back to a piece of text that I really love, kind of a remnant from 1988, which is the Crypto Anarchist Manifesto. And the reason I really like this text is because it embodies maybe the predictions of this movement of people who are utilizing cryptography and trying to realize its ramifications in the future. And the text itself is very prophetic. It gets so many things right, and still so many things wrong. Right. So it's an amazing piece of thing to look at, especially in retrospect. Right. We have the clarity of vision of of being 30 years later. So the Crypto Anarchist Manifesto is actually written in I think mid-1988 by Timothy C. May. He later goes on to work for Intel, but at the time he's circulating this text between a bunch of people who call themselves cypherpunks, and I think crypto anarchists after this suddenly appears. And crypto anarchism basically predicts that cryptography is going to strongly limit the power that the state holds over individuals. Okay, so this is the one place, maybe first time in history, we have the individual has a shot, right? You can maybe encrypt a file on your computer in a way that even a large state actor can't open it. Right? It's the first time the technology empowers the little guy over the big system. And as I said, many of the predictions come true, and still other developments maybe gave states more power than ever before. And I'd like to kind of use this chance to reflect about all of this. So a lot of the stuff in the Crypto Anarchist Manifesto is gonna look trivial today, but I want you to kind of put yourselves in the shoes of somebody in 1988, right? So what was the internet like in 1988? So mostly it was government and academia that were online. That's maybe obvious. And one way to look at it, the Washington Post wrote a nice article about this new thing, the internet. It was very, very nice, using internet and overlapping networks. Thousands of men and women in 17 countries swap recipes and woodworking tips, debate politics, religion, and antique cars, form friendships, and even fall in love. How wonderful and ideal. And there was so this article actually does talk about some of the darker sides. I think the first virus or worm that really had a large proliferation is mentioned there. But also, there's all this net etiquette. Netiquette is, I think the term is used there maybe for the first time. And one of the unbending rules that is that thou shalt not post commercial announcements on the net. It's not a nice thing to do. Obviously, this looks very funny in retrospect, but this is what people thought about the internet. It was very initial, and I think the manifesto stands in stark contrast to this, right? So the manifesto, like manifestos go, I think starts out kind of dark. So here's the text maybe. Okay, a specter is haunting the modern world. The specter of crypto anarchy. Okay, so we have to start big. It's a manifesto. And I'm going to show you some of the text from it and maybe talk, right, remind you of the things that we all know. I think we see in media all around us that really show how the predictions came about. So, right, computer technology is on the verge of providing the ability for individuals and groups to communicate and interact with each other in a totally anonymous manner. Right, so anonymity is very important here. Two persons may exchange messages, conduct business, and negotiate electronic contracts without ever knowing the true name or legal identity of the other. Right, so right off the bat, we see two very important things that I think maybe are central pillars of cryptography. One is the fact that you can have privacy. You can encrypt your messages in a way that nobody can see. You can also maybe obfuscate where your messages are going, the so-called metadata, and so on. And the other thing that I've highlighted here is electronic contracts. So what does it mean to have an electronic contract? At least my interpretation of what they thought was an electronic contract at the time was basically stuff that you could sign digitally. Maybe you could have your own identity basically represented by a public key or something like that and sign a message saying, this identity promises to do something. But there's this stark contrast between signing something and having it authenticated somehow, but still remaining anonymous, right? So what happens if you go back on your promise of your digital contract? You promised to pay somebody money and you didn't do it. Who's going to decide if the government can't even maybe know who you are? So this is later answered, I think, in the manifesto itself by the fact that reputation is very important. So what you're going to see is this libertarian anarchist world where when you don't do business well, there's no sanction by the state, but rather you suffer some reputation damage that prevents you from doing further business, right? So the manifesto goes on to say interactions of the networks will be untraceable via extensive rerouting of encrypted packets. You're going to hear about the Tor network tomorrow. This is basically a realization of that prediction that was. I think they already knew that this is something that they'd like to do. Tor essentially reroutes packets between many machines online and therefore hides the source and destination. Nobody can piece together the entire route. Right. There's also a mention of tamper-proof boxes that will implement cryptographic protocols. This is actually something that's coming into play a bit more now that companies like Intel and so on are producing tamper-proof hardware within their chips. So we don't know. Maybe that's also a very big change. Yeah.
I didn't understand.
The tamper-proof, the last one? So basically, a lot of the stuff that we'd like to do in computer science is be able to say that somebody executes a protocol on his own computer according to the rules, how we specify it. So one way to do it is to use some fancy cryptography and somehow force him to prove that he's done the right thing. This is very hard to do. Another way is to embed a piece of hardware inside every machine that is tamper-proof in the sense that it's kind of a black box that you cannot open, and it does computations. It sits locally on your computer, but you couldn't affect the results, right? So you could think of it as sort of a trusted emissary that you send to another country. He says, he reports things, and that cannot be manipulated in any way. And now Intel is actually selling something called SGX that is embedded in its newer chips and basically guarantees this functionality. Okay, so it gives a lot of other properties that you'd like to have, like digital rights management and so on. I could say I have the license to see this movie, and I could lie about it. I could program my machine to do different things, but with SGX inside, I wouldn't be able to tamper with that specific computation that's running on that part of the chip, supposedly, right? It's not as secure as Intel may want it to be. And that gives me more powers. This is already here in the manifesto, right? This is maybe a fairly recent development as a broadly available tool. Okay, so going on, right, the manifesto goes on to say, right, reputations will be of central importance. This is exactly the answer to why and how we function in this anonymous world where everybody can maintain privacy. You can have these maybe temporary identities that gain credibility over time, but if you misuse them, they lose reputation. Right, so these developments will alter completely the nature of government regulation, the ability to tax and control economic interactions, the ability to keep information secret. Right, so there are these far-reaching consequences. So there's the whole paragraph that I actually cut out here from the manifesto that basically says, talks about the technology that enables all of this. The technology, basically they say, has existed in theory for the past decade, but what really changed is that computer networks have shown up, of course, but also that there's sufficient speed to run these things. So cryptographic protocols are notoriously very hard, something that always kind of bogs us down. It used to affect us more in the 80s with respect to digital signatures and so on. That kind of went away. Now there are new things that we consider very hard to do because they're computationally expensive. And some of these things are also going away. And I'll maybe mention some of that later. They go on to say the state, of course, will try to halt the spread of this technology. So I think this is something that was more true at the time. I don't know, maybe a lot of you are familiar with this famous T-shirt that, showing people computer programs or exporting programs that did strong encryption. Exporting that from the US was illegal at the time. So people who were claiming free speech basically wrote the code for the RSA algorithm on a T-shirt. And you probably can't read this, but this T-shirt is classified as munitions. It may not be exported from the United States or shown to foreign nationals, right? And they were selling this online, actually. So, just to kind of stick it to the government. So obviously, the state did try to slow down or halt the spread of the technology. I think they completely gave up by the early 90s. So there's still some restrictions on cryptography, and there is still some monitoring. I think Adi Shamir can't easily get into the U.S. without and get a visa, but otherwise I think the doors are open. Right. Many of these concerns will be valid, actually, right? So the state will say that we need this because of national security. Drug dealers are going to use this. Tax evaders, fear of societal disintegration, right? We've already, I think, said ISIS. So ISIS, right? ISIS is using this strong cryptography that was munitions grade, and you weren't allowed to export. On cell phones, for example, during the Paris attacks, they all had the Telegram app, which is now on my phone as well. You can communicate with each other, and it's heavily encrypted, and supposedly safe from prying eyes. Right? And definitely, it does hinder government's ability to deal with terrorism and drug dealing and so on. So the manifesto doesn't say this doesn't happen. It is valid, but in some sense, it's an inevitability. This technology exists. It's going to be out there. You cannot stop it. It's not a matter of deciding not to use it. It's there. It's a fact of life. Right. So crypto anarchy will allow national secrets to be traded freely, and allow illicit stolen materials to be traded. I think we've seen that happen. And an anonymous computerized market will even make possible abhorrent markets for assassinations and extortion. Right? Various criminal and foreign elements will be active users of CryptoNet. But this will not halt the spread of crypto anarchy. Right? So all of these predictions came true. Right? We've seen WikiLeaks People are trading government secrets. They're using whistleblowers within government organizations to and that utilize encryption and other things, anonymizing technology to release information, maybe not sell it. This information later spins out in ways that we didn't expect, right? So maybe you've heard about the pedestrian emails that were leaked. People on Reddit and 4chan were going through them, and they decided that Hillary Clinton is actually running a child pornography ring out of a pizzeria. I don't know if you've heard about that. So this all ends with an armed guy walking into to a pizzeria, going to investigate these claims. Right. So information on the internet is maybe wild. It doesn't go as nicely as we hoped, but conspiracy theories are alive. Of course, there's the Silk Road. Right. This thing predicted marketplaces for drugs. Bought and sold via bitcoins, sent to your house over regular U.S. mail. Virtually unstoppable, except of course that the government does get the guy in charge. This is Ross Ulbricht. He's I think his appeal for his life sentence in prison was just rejected recently, and he's caught with all of his bitcoins confiscated and so on. So once, of course, the Silk Road goes down, another iteration, actually several iterations of dark marketplaces arise. Maybe the most interesting one, or one of the most interesting ones, is called Open Bazaar. So Open Bazaar already starts to use more and more technology, more sophisticated stuff, basically learning from the Silk Road's demise. It relies, it integrates Tor, it uses bitcoins, it's on a peer-to-peer network, there's no central server anymore, whereas the Silk Road had every file on a central server that you could grab, and all the bitcoins are saved in one place. This is now a marketplace that sells drugs and other things, of course, not just drugs. You can find t-shirts on there and so on, but I think a lot of people are interested in the drugs specifically. And this thing is much harder to take down. It's no longer on a single machine. It's distributed between many countries. Right? So you can, of course, find these things. And the prediction about reputation is also true. Right? If you were following the Silk Road when it was up, there was a Reddit thread discussing the various merchants on Silk Road, just like we basically get like eBay-style ratings on how good the product is. If you're dealing with drug dealers and so on, somebody will tell you, this is quality product, well packed, discreetly shipped, and they'll also say it's a pretty strong strain. Take it easy if you're planning to make it into edibles, right? So you don't get high for too long. But really, this is if you just remove this line, you could have been discussing any other product on eBay. Right, so Open Bazaar is actually not just crypto-anarchistic, bunch of people who are coding in the basement. There's a company, and it's raised capital from reputable places, Andreessen Horowitz, Union Square Ventures, Digital Currency Group invest in anything that's close to Bitcoin, and so on. So these guys are raising money. They're building a product. This product basically enables the sale of drugs, right? So I guess another prediction, maybe even exceeded expectations compared to the Manifesto. So back to the Manifesto, right? Just as technology, right? So this is kind of like the finishing paragraph. Just like the technology of printing presses altered and reduced the power of medieval guilds and social power structures, so too will cryptologic methods fundamentally alter the nature of corporations and of governments, interference in economic transactions. Right. So basically, here's the prediction again. Right, and it's all coming out of this obscure branch of mathematics that, right, maybe number theory that gives you cryptography eventually, algebra and number theory. Right, and it finishes with, arise, you have nothing to lose but your barbed wire fences. So in some sense, it is a call to arms, but also a very clear prediction of what is to come. Maybe talking more about the inevitability of what the technology is going to bring. Right, so maybe we can go, though, beyond the manifesto. A lot of things happened that weren't there, and a lot of things maybe exceeded expectations. So one of the things that did exceed expectations quite greatly is the use of digital money. Right, when we're sending money in cash form, that works very nice. When we start to do digital money transition, you're sending bits to somebody else. That doesn't behave like regular tokenized money anymore. And so when we had digital money appear, it basically always acted through an intermediary. You have this bank or a central server that you communicate with, and they usually have like a record of the balances. Right? So this is a point where suddenly governments can intervene with money transfer. Right? You can give a court order to this guy. In this world where everybody was just using cash, you couldn't stop transactions, monetary transactions. That ability was not there. So this is something from the digital age. And of course, the thing that changes the game here again is the appearance of things like Bitcoin, which basically takes this intermediary, this third party to every transaction, and breaks it up into a network of computers that are now spread around the world. And so somehow the crypto-anarchistic agenda gains another building block. Now not just the ability to transfer messages privately, not only the ability to authenticate yourself, but also to transfer actual value, actual money. And what really happens is that this information here about the ledger, about who holds which tokens and what money, is replicated all over this network. So in some sense, this is what Bitcoin brings to the table, this ability to manage this data structure in a distributed way and still make money happen somehow. Right, so this is in computer science called just managing this distributed data structure is called the consensus problem in permissionless systems in this case. But that's maybe too technical. So other things that happened as a result, now that we have this money on the internet, we suddenly see extortion showing up, so malware. What you're seeing here is basically graphs following the transfer of funds after ransomware attacks. So each one of these small circles is a payment that somebody made to the Loki network. And the red lines are actually transfers by the people running the ransomware withdrawing money to an exchange called BTCE. Basically, where they want to convert the bitcoins that they gained for euros or dollars or something of the sort. So as you see, because of Bitcoin's data structure is replicated everywhere, everybody can see it, everybody can see the data. Privacy again is hurt here. And you can follow these transactions. You can find a lot more of them. If you do some analysis on the graph, you probably can't see this, but every one of these stars is a transfer of maybe 50 bitcoins. At the time, what you're seeing here is maybe $2 or $3 million worth of revenue over 1 month of operation of a single strain of malware called Loki. Okay, so we're seeing this economy of crime develop over these maybe building blocks that the manifesto maybe predicted for us. And indeed, all this money ends up going into an exchange called BTCE. And just this summer, a Russian hacker is arrested in Cyprus and is indicted for being for masterminding this money laundering operation that took all of that money from all of ransomware, plus a lot of other things, many other things that were stolen, and basically laundering about $4 billion worth of bitcoins. So this guy is arrested, right? So we're now in this world, in some sense, where the crypto-anarchistic predictions have happened, in the sense that we see the crime, we see money being able to flow, we see these extortion markets, we see government try to fight them, maybe successfully to some degree, right? This hacker does get arrested. The Silk Road is indeed shut down. So now, owing to, these, taking back these ideas of privacy, people start to build these services over Bitcoin that basically do similar things to what Tor does for communication. They start to scramble money together. So what you're seeing here is a transaction graph from something called a Bitcoin mixer, basically trying to obfuscate where money is coming from and going. And this is something that malware has not been using, for example. Right, so as we progress more and more, maybe beyond what the Manifesto predicted, more and more modern crypto is becoming possible. And there are two things, again, that are in charge here. Or maybe one of them is theoretical advances. There's constant improvements of the things that we know how to do. But maybe just as importantly is more compute power. Just like things in the 80s became suddenly possible because computers were getting stronger, we're now able to do things that we couldn't do in the 80s with modern machines. Right? So two of the most important maybe things that are suddenly making an appearance now are called non-interactive zero-knowledge proofs. This is one very important tool. And the other is secure multi-party computation. So these two things are maybe like super cryptographic primitives that allow you to do a lot of other things that you can build with them. So let me try and explain what non-interactive zero-knowledge proofs are and how they help, maybe just intuitively. So what is a non-interactive zero-knowledge proof? So basically, suppose that I was trying to give you a statement about the world. I want to prove something to you, but I don't want to reveal how this, the details underlying the proof. So let's give a concrete example. Let's say there's a buffet for lunch at the conference, and we're each allowed to take a certain amount of food, maybe 1 kilogram of food, and that's the limitation. But you can take a salad, you can take cookies, you can take meat, you can take anything you want as long as it's under 1 kilogram. There's a certain amount of portion. But I want to go to the buffet and take cookies, and I'm worried about my privacy. I don't want anybody to know that I took cookies rather than salad, right? I want everyone to think that I eat healthy. And so I want to prove to you that I took under 1 kilogram, but I don't want to see you to show you what I did, what I did take. Right, so we know how to do this intuitively, at least in the physical world. Right, I can take my cookies, I can put them in an opaque box, right, and I can place them on a scale against a 1 kilogram weight, right. And if the scales stay tipped to this side, to the side of the weight, right, then I know that whatever's in the box, I don't know what's in the box, but I know it weighs less than 1 kilogram. Right, so basically, this is kind of a proof that whatever's in the box, we don't know what it is, it's just under 1 kilogram without revealing the underlying information. So how does this relate to anything, right? So one of the tricks is to... Sorry?
How do you know that there are cookies in the box?
I put the cookies inside. There's a curtain like when you go to vote, I stuff the cookies in the box, I close the box, I go outside, I'm supposed to pay for lunch, we put it on the scales, and everybody hopefully agrees that I took less than 1 kilogram. Okay, so what is the analogy here? So there's a computational version of this trick that I can maybe prove about things that are in the box somehow, prove things about the contents of boxes. So let's suppose I wanted to say something like, Alice owns a coin, and I want to put it on a blockchain like Bitcoin. I want to publish it to the world for every computer on this network to see. But I don't want them to understand what they're seeing. So basically I encrypt it, or rather I hash it, and I send just maybe the encrypted version onto the blockchain. Right? So now every computer in the world has a copy of this information, but they're not able to open the box and see it's encrypted. Right? They don't know what it is. Now if Alice wants to transfer this money to somebody else, maybe to Bob, they need to now basically write another message that says Bob has a coin, but this is also encrypted. right? So there's a problem here. These messages are encrypted. How do I make sure that when I write the message saying Bob owns a coin, I don't write 2 coins in there, maybe, or 3, and I write the same number that was in Alice's box. So basically what I need to be able to do is to prove that the contents of this box and this box are basically the same number. Right? This is one of the things that I'd like to show for this to be a legitimate monetary system that allows for transactions. This is exactly what zero-knowledge proofs allow you to do. You can prove that the amount that was received by Bob equals the amount that Alice originally owned. And there are other things that you want to do in zero-knowledge, basically, to make sure that Alice cannot spend her coin twice, and so on and so forth. So what everybody sees in the world is just these encrypted messages. But what actually happens is that inside the box, we transfer the right amount of money without showing it to anybody else. So this is a privacy technology. This was used in a currency called Zcash to make cryptocurrencies much more anonymous. Unfortunately, when you use this cryptographic primitive, what you need to do is you need to go through this phase initially of setting up the system. You need to generate these random keys that are later used for these proofs. And they need to be generated in a way that eventually nobody knows the secret that was used to create them. So Zcash was basically forced to do something called a trusted setup ceremony, where they used machines to generate these random keys and eventually destroyed them with power tools, trying to avoid the corruption of this data, right? Or theft of this data. Because anybody who gets these secrets can later break the system. They were really, really worried about NSA involvement and eavesdropping on their ceremony. So this is an actual photo of a journalist who was following them during the setup ceremony. And they're actually doing another one now with a slightly different protocol. So this is an email I received really last night about another person that contributed to this ceremony of creating randomness that goes into establishing this cryptographic protocol. He describes the result of his computation, but then he also says, I powered down the PC, and I destroyed the RAM and hard drive with power tools to make sure that nobody gets the secret randomness that I used during this process. And this process goes from person to person. And if even one person's secret remains hidden, then the system can be secure. So this is maybe a new level of anonymity, hopefully gaining more than we imagined before. Another thing that the manifesto did not accurately predict is what would happen with the electronic contracts. So I think when they say electronic contracts at the time, they meant, right, I would sign something with my public key. This would later be associated with that specific identity. But now the electronic contracts are starting to take a whole new meaning with blockchains. There are much stronger notions of enforcement, right? A blockchain that is now holding data replicated at every machine is basically now holding a copy of the contract at every single machine, if that's what I decide to place there. Right? So maybe one very famous such contract is called the DAO. It was a computer program that basically described the rules for a venture capital fund that you could buy into. It was running on a system called Ethereum. And the contract for the DAO is actually a piece of code. It tells you what happens if you request certain actions, and every machine on the network, on the Ethereum network, upholds these rules basically by running the code. So contracts and computer code suddenly start to merge. And unfortunately, there was a bug that was discovered in this contract. So it's actually on the slide here, the bug. These guys who created the contract basically say, we found this bug in the smart contract called the recursive call bug, and we fixed it, and everything is now fine. And then a few days later, maybe 5 days later, they announced that they're actually undergoing a sophisticated attack. Turns out that this bug in the code that they thought they found was actually also in other places in the code. And they end up losing $50 million of ether over a few days. Basically, as this contract is executed by all of these machines on the Ethereum network, the attacker is able to withdraw money, and nobody is able to reverse this decision because the decision is made unanimously, in some sense, by this large computer network. Right? So I can actually show you the bug. Maybe it's a bit technical, so I might just skip it. If you're interested, I'll show it to you later. Okay, so maybe these are some of the things that we've exceeded expectations with, in some sense, compared to the manifesto. But we can, of course, ask ourselves, so who's winning after all, right? So do you really think that governments are losing power due to the appearance of cryptography and modern security? So I think my answer to this is to say no. I don't think this is happening. So in some sense, the manifesto gets every prediction right, but wins every battle, but loses the war in some sense. And we know why, right? We know that mass surveillance is somehow easier than ever, right? So even if we go offline, just we're not on the internet. You just have cameras in the physical world. You now have the processing power, the computational processing power, to find faces in every single feed. That enables states to follow you much better in the physical world, even if you think that you've won in the cyber domain. We have things like smart ID cards and databases of our fingerprints and DNA that Israel has decided to establish, contrary to advice by security experts, I think. We see a lot of examples where states basically break, abuse, right, systems. We've seen some today. So, right, maybe during the coup in Turkey, or after the coup, the attempted coup, 75,000 suspects are arrested just for downloading an app that has better encryption. Right, they're immediate suspects just because they use that. The Great Firewall of China works relatively well. Roger might tell you tomorrow about some of the games that they've been playing with China, trying to poke holes in the Chinese firewall. But most Chinese who are not sophisticated don't get access to information from outside, right? There was, right, even maybe in other countries that are not trying to be oppressive, right? There are cases trying to test the borders. The U.S. fights with Apple to try to get the iPhone from the San Bernardino shooting opened. And eventually they just succeed without Apple's involvement. Right? So this, so how is the individual protected from government's prying eyes if eventually, I guess, all of Apple's might does not protect you or your data? And maybe there are things that are missing from the Anarchistic Manifesto that we would now put in there if we would write it today. And one of the things is, of course, the power of corporations. We unknowingly give out a lot of data, and sometimes very willingly give out a lot of our data. And most people just don't care enough about privacy, right? So the education of the general public has fallen short, right? Net neutrality is under attack. The battle is still raging about what will be regulated and what won't. So I'd like to finish with a slide that actually I heard in a talk by Adi Shamir. So I defer to, right? So when I give predictions, it's not as strong as when Adi does it. He's a very well-renowned cryptographer, and he gave a keynote address in financial cryptography last year. And right, so I cut out some of the predictions that were more technical about quantum cryptography and other things that are less relevant. But basically, he says, right, cybersecurity is terrible. It is only going to get worse. Right? It's not going to get better. The Internet of Things will be a security disaster. There's just going to be more computers to hack everywhere. And cyber warfare is going to be the norm. Right? So he gives, maybe if you look almost 30 years later, Adi gives like a very stark prediction of what's the future like. Governments are not going to tolerate anonymity anywhere, right? They're going to actively fight it. This is more in line maybe with the manifesto. Most people will not demand or expect real privacy. That war is already lost. It's gone, right? There's no expectation of privacy. Right? It's like when you go out to the street. No, you don't expect people not to see you. We don't expect not to be seen on the internet. Tools to fight cybercrime and attacks will further diminish privacy. Right? More and more power gained by the state to fight these things diminishes privacy. So basically, Adi gives the opposite prediction from the manifesto. He says we're going to lose, not to win. And he also says Bitcoin will fade away, but will leave a legacy. Okay, so these are maybe more recent predictions. This is much darker in some sense than the manifesto. So I'll stop here. I'll let everybody get to lunch, and thank you for your time.
Does anyone have a quick question to Aviv before we break?
Extremely quick. I know everyone's hungry.
Sorry? No. Quick.
Should
Yeah.
I use a mic or?
Yeah.
So a very quick question regarding maybe an omission, maybe it was done on purpose. What you didn't comment on mandatory key disclosure laws that many countries now have in place, meaning that if you are either a suspect or a witness in a case, you have to give out your encryption keys to cooperate with investigative authorities, or else. This depends from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but already many jurisdictions have this in place, which basically means all the crypto efforts are kind of diminishing if you go to jail if you don't disclose your keys. Any comments on this?
So I think what computer scientists like to think about more is the realm of possibility, right? You could decide not to give your keys, and there's nothing anybody can do about it, right? So what would bother me more is the fact that governments are mandating companies like Apple, like Google, like Facebook to put in backdoors to any product, right? They're requesting backdoor access to any encrypted thing. So now you're going to be able to say, I don't want to give my keys, and they're going to open it anyway, right?
If you don't give your keys, for example, in the UK, people are getting jail time for not.
That's true, but so the crypto anarchist here would say, they could always coerce you to do things. This is maybe, torture is an old technology even. Or you could put somebody in jail. That's mildly discomfortable. That's a mild form of discomfort, but you used to be able to torture people for information. This has not changed, right? This is something in the world that hasn't changed, but there is this physical impossibility. If I keep my keys in my head and I don't disclose them, there's nothing you can do, right? So this is what crypto anarchists would say. Of course, you're right. We don't want to get tortured. We don't want to get asked for our passwords for Facebook entering the US, for example. But people still have to give them if they want to kind of play along.
But the outcome would be the same if you coerce people or if you develop a backdoor. The outcome in terms of privacy will be the same.
So the backdoor, I think, is scarier.
So one final question, then we break for lunch.
I was wondering if you think that the sort of recent turn in cryptocurrencies towards being much more speculative, deflationary investment vehicles sort of inhibits their ability to act as currency, and if you think any of the sort of cryptocurrencies are kind of resisting that and being more effective as currencies.
I think it's definitely affecting the way they're used as currencies. It's even affecting the way they're being developed. So a lot of people in the Bitcoin world are talking about Bitcoin as a store of value. Right? There's this whole battle: is Bitcoin just going to be a store of value, or is it going to be a payment network where you actually want to pay people with it? And this debate is affecting the way the protocol is developed. Right? So, of course, the speculative nature also hurts regular use because you don't want to keep a lot of currency when it's fluctuating. Right? But this might go away. I think eventually. The hype is going to kind of die down. So we're in a transitional phase at the moment.
And there's also a regulatory dimension, right? Whether it's security regulation or whether it's monetary regulation.
Yes, this can actually make or break the currency, right? If it's a currency and you can go to the store and pay with it, and there's no tax event at that point in time, that's very nice. If when you're buying an apple, you just exchange a good for a good, and you may have had capital gains as a result, and you need to file something with tax authorities just for buying an apple, you might not use it as a payment network, and it might drive the currency in one direction versus the other. Right.
Good. So we now break for lunch, and we have a quick lunch downstairs, and we resume at 2 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you.